So thank you very much for not joining the nice sun and coming down to the dark room here. And thank you very much to this kind of very nice translation. Like I heard it's a double translation into Swedish and then into the signing. The first time I have it. I would like, as there are so many students here, I would like to encourage you to think alteration a little further than just this kind of very boring technical alteration, energy-wise or whatever. And maybe to say one thing to our practice, we have a lot of collaborators, maybe I will name some of them. And one thing, we also have like a public seminar in Berlin on the spatial production of the Berlin Republic. And there we try to define what architecture is about as a basis of this kind of public seminar. And we quoted it as architecture is the ordering of social relations through building. That means, if you think in terms of alteration, it's a completely different thing than if you would take a quote as a basis like form follows function. So if this kind of architecture is ordering of social relations through building, any alteration would mean to alterate the social relations. And there's a very specific culture in Berlin, at least over the 30, 40 years, a constant culture of alteration. I would like to introduce that to you shortly in the beginning. This is a contemporary auction list. It's houses in Leipzig, and you see the price. So the whole house is for sale for 8,000 euro, and here the whole block is for sale for 12,000 euro. There's no use in it's abandoned buildings. And in the 70s was more or less the same situation in West and East Berlin. And so this first generation of squatters that came up in the 70s in West Berlin, only West Berlin, they had this problem that squatting is an illegal act. On the other hand, property is a duty. That's the main point in the German constitution. Property is a duty. It's not providing you with rights connected to property, but it's also a duty in terms of the society. And they came up with a very clever quote. They called it not longer squatting, Besetzung in German, but Instandbesetzung. Instandbesetzung, there's no word in the English language. I try to explain it. So if a squatter is maintaining the squatted building, it's a kind of maintenance squatting. So now we have two political discussions going on. One is the illegal act of squatting, and one is that the property is not rightly used in terms of a duty. So even in that time, the conservative mayor had to quote that if there's a right for air and there's a right for water for everybody, there should also be a right for living. And it's not right that the police should enter this kind of balanced situation of illegal squatting and not being in charge for their own property. That's very important for the whole Berlin situation, this kind of squatting and all these alternative living models that were combined with it. So this photo here is from the 80s. With the fall of the Berlin Wall in 89, a second generation of squatters came in, for sure, because then the east part had all this kind of old buildings. And a new kind of culture of alteration came up. Maybe the older ones of you know some of them. This is, all these photos now, the next 10 photos, is from Martin Eberle, from a book Temporary Spaces. It's always outside of a club and inside, of let's say, of a situation. So that's Berlin, Tokyo. It's founded by architect students. It was a club, and it was also a place to produce and whatever subversive culture they could think about. Very simple. That's the first pure music club, Dirt, in the old shop. And you see that the kind of alteration doesn't need so much money to change it to something else. The next is the Maria, which is still existing in a different location. maybe they defined what we call now the lounge style worldwide. And the Tresor, it was really a hardcore club in an old Tresor. There was an alteration of the Bank of East Germany. And at least the last example, the E-Werk, it was an old power station. And they made it much more professional in terms of music quality and sound systems and so on. So all the kind of Berlin type was somehow set up in that period. So that's a Straumschmiere, Peaches, so all this kind of very specific actors came up. And also in terms of entrepreneurs and how to make money, and a lot of architect students of that generation didn't end up as an architect, but running clubs and whatever. So, as you asked me to do a little introduction to this Palast der Republik and the Zwischennutzung, maybe that's also a very important phrase, Zwischennutzung. It means like a temporary use of a space, and there were like special laws coming out that this in-between use was quite safe, like you could use it for 2 years or alteration temporarily wise. So this Palast der Republik, this is like photos before the change of Germany, was taken over. Everybody thought it's too huge to be alterated temporarily. But instead, it was a complete culture of in-between, intermediate use, with the same techniques than the alterations to clubs before. So there is all this experience, like giving from one to the next. I don't name the authors of all this work there, just to give you a rough idea. And in the end, it was something like a Centre Pompidou coming out of an alteration of a former palace of the Republic of East Germany, with all these conferences with Rem and whoever. But in the end, it turned out that alteration is always, there's always a part of ideological change involved. For sure, this old establishment of West Germany, they didn't feel like it was a recombination of East and West Germany, but that somehow they took over. So therefore, this Palace of the Republic had to be destroyed. There was no doubt that also this very successful, very last exhibition, which was called White Cube, was very successful. But there was no doubt that it couldn't stop the demolition of the Palast der Republik. But as it turned out that a lot of international artists like Olafur Elias, when you see a piece there, German ones like Thomas Damon and a lot of others, they came up with this idea of a temporary Kunsthalle, temporary art hall, which was placed here in this Palace of the Republic. And as it was nearly impossible to avoid all the clash just to stop the use of the Palast der Republik, they were given a new space when the Palace of the Republic was destroyed. You see it here in the back. It's this temporary Kunsthalle, which was in use for 2 or 3 years, which took over the old image of the Palast der Republik for one moment, for one exhibition. And then you had this really strange situation that on this Schlossplatz, you have on the left side the Bauakademie. It's a Schinkel building that has destroyed long ago, and it should be reconstructed. You have here the temporary art hall, which looks like the old Palace of the Republic. And then you have this kind of box, which is already indicating that we start to restore, reconstruct the old Preußen castle. So it's like an avatar battlefield now for that claims for alteration of this. It's very the center of Berlin, also ideological wise. Now it's looking like this. And this box, which looks so like a future object, is the platform to look on the reconstruction, on the building side of the reconstruction of the castle. So as they got to know, well, maybe all this young generation, up to my age, a little older, they don't like this idea of reconstruction of a Prussian castle. So they have this object that's altering the situation to something else, so to avoid the explicit castle building. And you also see that the temporary Kunsthalle disappeared. So now the next place was searched. There was a little competition. And we thought maybe it would be quite clever, as we have been one of the offices asked to construct, to build up a new temporary Kunsthalle, to think back to this kind of alteration and adaptation and appropriation of existing spaces. So this is a space that's very important for the soul of the Berlin soul, because that's the first stadium of Hertha BSC, the most famous soccer club in Berlin. This has been destroyed, but what you see here, that's called the Vereinsheim. I don't know how to translate, whether like the real members meet before and after the games. This one. And this was still existing. So this is a building ruin from the 90s. There should be a huge sports hotel. And it's one of the catastrophes, and we have a lot in Berlin, that nobody talks about, though there is no list about all this kind of catastrophes somewhere around in the city. So we thought, well, maybe that's the best idea, because we knew this building quite well, just to claim it as the new temporary, but not temporary then, Kunsthalle, because also spaces in there. So this is spaces like 4 meters high. So it's everything in to use it as a Kunsthalle. So this is like 8 meters high and 1,600 square meter big. So back. But then 2 weeks before the competition was decided, it was sold to a Turkish investor, because it was not public. So the one who sold it is also in charge for all the culture in Berlin. But in his mind, he couldn't connect this existing building ruin to the use as a temporary an art hall. So one of the facts out of this is that we have been commissioned to work on a list together with all the authorities in Berlin, a list of catastrophes that's lying deep in their papers and nobody talks about. And we have now like detected 200 really well-working catastrophes for other uses, so for alterations. And then there will be a combination. It will be used as a wedding party place for Turkish weddings, alternating with art exhibitions. So I just show you one project, the only one we realized in Berlin, as I'm just 3 years there. It was based on in an area quite close. You see here the TV tower of Alexanderplatz. And what you see here on the right side, that is part of the 3rd generation of squatters, which is not longer related to social ideas, to live together different. It's much more that Polish punks fight Scandinavian punks, who is the one in charge for the building. So it's really changed a lot. So we had this side. I just go through shortly, because it's quite, I will explain afterwards. That there was also a basement existing. It's also a building ruin of the 90s, when all the gold rush came to Berlin. Everybody thought, well, we can make a lot of money out of a new capital. But it turned out it wasn't so easy. So this was laying there for 15, 20 years when we took it over. That's the existing basement. And our first idea was just to add one roof to use it as it is. But then there were quite a lot of external influences to involve in the project. So it was more or less, we took it like an existing building with all the information from around. So not to create a completely new one, but just work and put in this kind of complex requirements from the existing surrounding. So one was fixed in the contract that we had to cut the building, that the sun could come into the inner courtyard. Then we said, okay, if there is existing buildings, we just take this information. We don't finish the building, so that everybody who moves in can do his own space, and we keep it open for any kind of alteration. That's already thought in this process. And there are some ceilings are missing because now this is the place where there's a gallery in, and we thought, well, they need higher spaces than a normal use. And you can see here quite well. So if they move out one day, we can just screw in the reinforcement to use it different with different heights. I'll just follow it quickly. And even the elevator doors already installed because it's quite difficult to change the elevator later, and also the electricity for the use later is already in. And there's a lot of tools in that this, even if it's a new building, it thinks already how it will be changed in the future. The alteration mustn't be just a process when something is already existing at a finished building, but can also be part of a design process of any kind of building. Here it's the same. There will be a new floor in if they will move out. And as you can see here, if you put office furniture in, it can be used as an office. If you put a dining table in, it's a dining room. And therefore, we have a mixture now, and that was very important for the project. So this is 032C. It's a magazine, quite fashionable magazine. We have office space, we have atelier space in, and we have this gallery down here. And all this material, you can see, this one is a very cheap one. And also in the contracts, in the rent contracts, everybody is allowed to just throw it out, because it's just like 100 euros square meter, so nobody cares for if that's like replaced through something else. And the staircase is thrown out because then the spaces inside are completely free for any kind of use. So here we used a lot of this cheap place because one of the points is that you really can enter a space to change the use. So alteration, that terms of Berlin culture, means that it's quite cheap. So we made the decision that we should build as cheap as possible. So it's 1,000 euro a square meter, which is 9,000 Swedish crowns a square meter for the whole building, including the ground. But that means that it's looking different. But as it turns out, maybe not so bad. And especially because we had all this discussion in Berlin about reconstruction and the castle and all this kind of backwards looking building production. So that became in that discussion quite important. And alteration can also mean not to be focused on the specific production of built space. So this is like the same she is doing now. It's a transformation into music. So there are seismic sensors embedded in the concrete, and you can it's 8 seismic sensors mixed, so you can listen to the building, which is somehow has different tensions. And I think this kind of opening up to other forms of production is quite important if you take it as a cultural practice. And as we were new in Berlin, we were not trained in this kind of in-between production, so we also entered this kind of special abilities to train ourselves. So this is one of the most famous clubs, the Berghain, and we had been asked from a friend who was giving a concert there together with Attila. Attila is a singer of Mayhem. Mayhem is a Norwegian band that became quite famous because they're somehow living in the woods, painted like Kiss. One suicided himself, and then the other band member was selling these bloody remnants to whomever. And then another band member killed a band member, and so they became famous of this kind of stories. And we thought if these guys are living in the woods, and that's very much related to their practice, let's say, maybe we could change the whole setting when we were asked to design a stage. So what we did a flower pot, and we had the biggest beamer in town, and we were just having a live performance out of the flower pot. And then Attila left the concert because in the middle of the concert he recognized that it was all like making jokes on mayhem. So that was quite a nice. So, and then this was some people talked about, and then we were invited. So this is in our office when we tested our plant pot. Then we were invited to Art Basel Miami, to the ocean front, and to do a same setting like that. So there we thought, okay, let's put some other elements together. So we had this live camera in the plant pot. And we had some slides from all the refugees from Cuba to Miami. And then we had we had a lot of sound stuff. And then we were like live mixing the whole story, how this Cuba refugees came to Miami. And there was a lot of shooting in that time. And then the Cuban mayor stopped all this action. So the next and the next and the next action follows, and now this is called Concrete Society, the people we work together on that project. And as you were mentioning, that research is, I would like to stress it in that moment. So to find places where alteration could happen does not need somebody who's owning a building that has to be changed, like Benetton. So this is all, so our office is here, somewhere here. So we were just detecting around and we were discovering this kind of strange walls. It's always in between an old building of the 19th century and buildings from East Germany from 70s to 80s, till 89. And as and we wondered what's behind there. And in fact, it's empty. And the lots are quite small, you can imagine. So the widest one is 4 meters and 20 meters deep. That's from the back side. So if it was the street side, it was always covered completely because nobody should see that there's a void behind. And if it was to the backyard, it was only the ones, this wall was much lower, so nobody could use the space in between. And as you see here, it's this kind of prefab elements building that East Germany was quite famous for. And they just had rectangular elements. So if the old city plan had a slight curve, like here, so they could just put it together like this. Or if we go back, no, I'll show it later. So that's the inside here. And an example, so you have either, it's 2 buildings of East Germany that can't follow the road, or like here, it's an old building and a new building. Maybe we have a better one. Do we have a better one? Where you can see it here quite well. So this is a new one, this is an old one. Though the street is like this, but the old buildings haven't been, like the walls haven't been rectangular to the street. So that was the same reason. So they couldn't fit to it properly. But what came out formally, that these gaps are quite beautiful if you isolate them as a non-void. So the question now, we will buy 25 of them, and that will be the next art hall. It's because it's huge walls that can be used. The only problem is that the viewing distance is a little low, but that allows a lot of new curating stuff. And there are some elements in a city, like this church of the 60s that are really beautiful but are empty as well. Because in Germany, I don't know how it's up here, in Germany the religious communities decrease enormously. So the Catholic Church in Germany has only half of the members than 20 years before. Therefore, they don't need all the churches. So this church, I won't explain the project, that's one of the churches we will also buy with some partners and give it a different use. And it's a really interesting church, especially of the 60s, because it's not this kind of old churches, but it's this very great architecture. All that the space is in can't be used for a lot of normal uses. So that's of the same age. It's West Berlin, one of the projects we start right now. It's also a kind of prefab, but only the facade. It's also of the 60s. It was an apartment house, and for sure all the standards don't fit into a current use. So the first thing is we went into the structural engineering of this building and found out that the facade is not load-bearing, and that the load-bearing elements are just walls rectangular to the street, and there are no load-bearing walls in the other direction, or very few ones. And then we found out, well, it didn't use the complete depth that it could use. So here we can add another 3 meters, or 2 meters on this side, and another 4 meters here, and we can make it higher. And then we had this discussion, because this is 2 listed buildings on the left and the right. The one is from the 19th century, middle of the 19th century, and the other one is from the early 20th century. And we were really afraid that we have somehow, because it's 2 monuments, listed monuments, that we have somehow to adapt to this kind of buildings. And then we found what was really interesting on that side, that it's directly opposite of the Neue Nationalgalerie by Mies van der Rohe. And chapeau, we thought, oh, we can build in front of this hero. And then in the end, maybe we will be forced to adapt to this kind of buildings. So we didn't, let's call it alteration of an old magazine. It was the first publication directly after the Neue Nationalgalerie was finished. And we filled in a building, a fake building from Mies van der Rohe, and it's his drawings from the Friedrichstraße building, and we morphed them to the form we would like to put in. And then we placed this magazine to a lot of people that are in charge with cultural heritage, with listing, and like a fake project, like an unknown Mies van der Rohe building. And in the end, it turned out it was quite sufficient. So then there was this Mies van der Rohe building in the Neue Nationalgalerie. And then we added it quite natural in the kind of same drawings he was using. So this is the old structure of the existing building. And that's the extension in depth. Also, we had to change the grid because now there is a garage underneath. So the old building, this one has like a 4 meters structure. And there we had to have this 5 or 7 meter 50 structure from the parking. And we added something in behind, which is more like a floral staircase. And we were just using black and white. So that was the second step, to introduce these images also to some newspapers. And in the end, they all followed us. And now we are allowed to build this building more related to this Mies van der Rohe than to the old buildings beside. So just to tell you that also, and the project that's coming out, I think it's really, we couldn't have designed it by having a great idea or not having a great idea. But so to let all these influences come in and to relate to this Mies van der Rohe building finally led us to a very specific, no, we don't call it design, project. And that's quite interesting. Also this kind of, so this is a project I just want to tell about because of the economic basis. So this is a lake. It's connected to a river system leading directly into Berlin. It's 20 kilometers away from our office. And there is an existing building which was a ground that was for sale. where this building is standing on. And they calculated is like, the calculation was like this, just going back, as there's no allowance any longer to build there. But as there was an existing building, there was a building permission for a very small, tiny one-family house with 100 square meter, only one floor. That's it, 100 square meter. So the price for the ground was 200,000 euro, minus the costs for the destruction of this building. And as you can see, it's really an ugly building. But it's 500 square meters. And we thought, okay, so we take the ground for 140,000 euro, but we don't remove it. And then we have a ground, 140,000, for a building with 500 square meters. Also, it's very, very ugly. So this is a model of the building, and we thought, okay, maybe alteration does not always mean to be good to the building, to be nice to the building. Maybe we can really use it as a rough material. Maybe some of you know the film Tamrock with Michel Piccoli, very great architectural film. So, which just changed the roof, because the roof, this material was unhealthy, it has asbestos fibers in, so we had to remove it. So we put a concrete roof on, it's a waterproof concrete. And this waterproof concrete gives us a terrace with 250 square meter, and also it's like a structural element that we can really like throw out from the inside wherever we like to. We just have to keep like 30% of the load-bearing walls. So that means first comes this roof, then we go into it, so where would be the best view to the sea? And then we just ask all our friends to come and get like real heavy stuff and throw it out wherever we like. And I think like this, it can become quite a, so this is how we worked on the model. So this is how it will turn out. But we don't know exactly how it will look like, because that's just an example of how the holes could come out in the end. And then we just glue isolation glass behind with some silicone, it's perfect. So in terms of scale, this is a project we did like some years ago already. So this is a coal mining in Germany. And the coal is like 30 to 50 meters deep in the earth. So to dig out the coal, you have to remove the sand, which is above, get out the coal, and then all the dirt, the soil, the sand, is placed where the coal is already taken out. So that's a process about 30, 40 years. So you have a hole slightly walking through the landscape, and it will end up somewhere. And especially this one, it moves by a village, Elsdorf, and they have a lot of dust of all this coal mining. And they also have the power station there, where the coal is transferred into electricity. And most of the people that work there, so they're happy that the village doesn't have to move away. Other villages are just like falling into the coal mine. And we have been asked to design a viewing point when the hole is passing by because now it's touching the village, and in 5 years it will be over, the whole hole. And they had like 3 million euro to design a nice platform to watch the hole coming by. And then we advised them maybe we should use the money not for a viewing point, but to change the plans of how the hole will move by. So it's coming from here. Yeah, it started somewhere here. Now it's slightly moving, and they always put the soil and the earth behind. And we thought it's a pity that one day, because you have to know, normally the water level is 4 meters underground. And this is 60 meters deep. So after this last hole, how it was planned, will be a huge lake, but really a huge lake. Like half size of Bodensee, which is quite huge. And so we advised them, maybe you should start, as the hole is now placed here, you should start to put the remnant not always behind, but to put the remnant here, 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 and here. So in the end of the process, you are not longer Elsdorf, but Elsdorf am See, so Elsdorf at a lake. Then maybe that's much more clever to end up as a sea village than to have a viewing point when the whole is passing by. So that's also about alteration. Also, it's not like in the first step, it's not about alteration of a building, but to go into the plans of how production takes place and how it's organized. So, just to show you that that there's a new thinking around in terms of what's an original and what's the value of a change. So this is one of the very first Le Corbusier buildings in Pessac. It's a publication of a French writer, sociologist Boudin, and it was a research 40 years later in the 60s, and you can see that the people, this is real countryside there, it's in the Bordeaux, they changed the windows to a more local style. Also here, so that was original. The next page is even more fancy, so that was original, and they changed it to all this kind of adaptations and new windows, and so for sure everybody would argue that's like a destruction of the holy Le Corbusier. But on the other hand, there's a completely new culture. Just show you one project of Elemental in Chile. That's a low-cost building, and what they didn't realize out of the money, it's 10,000 euro for one unit. They just left away the buildings in between, and said, okay, people who move in, because it's really like low cost, they will like on-go with this kind of adaptation to their kind of use, like a permanent alteration. So after 5 or 6 years, it was already looking like this. So just to tell you that the kind of design process can be completely different if you think in terms of alteration already in the design process. And now that's a very last project. Well, we make this a very last project. We have a discussion, we have elections in Berlin now. And currently we have 4 parties that are our representatives. We have a left-left coalition. And you could think that we have a left-wing city policy, but as the left wing is quite strong in Berlin, maybe they forgot about their original ideas, especially in terms of properties. And for the moment, or for the last 8 years especially, in a left-left coalition, most of the city property, real estate property, is sold. It's all privatized. And now there's quite a huge group of architects and city planners saying, wow, is that so clever? We learned about if we put the infrastructure to some American investors, this cross-border leasing of tube systems, water systems, and lease it back. It turned out it was not so clever. And to sell the property of social housing to investors also turned out that's not so clever. So now we told the city government and also all the other parties, well, but in the elections now, nobody is coming up, none of the parties gives us the choice to vote for somebody who says, I will stop the selling out of the public properties. And as this is the original idea of democracy, that you can choose between contents, but if this kind of ability to choose, it's not longer provided, so maybe we should come up with a project in that term to change this a bit in the political level. So this is the color, so just mixed red, which is the 2 left-wing parties, and there's yellow and black, and then this beautiful brown came out. And we found some art institutions, they gave us a lot of money, though now there's 100,000 posters printed. Oh, here. And this is part of our office. They are putting from huge packs of glue, filling them into small packs of glue, though it's no crack kitchen, nothing. And we provided to all the art institutions, to libraries, to bookshops, to also to poor people, can ask for food. They use it to put food in, this kind of posters. Some of the art institutions already use it as an exhibition thing. Some of the art institutions, that's the Neue Berliner Kunstverein, they just close their windows and they no more exhibitions till you don't change. So people, and they're all for free, the posters, and there is this little package, it's with a zipper, so just fill water in, wait an hour, and then it's just sufficient for one poster, and you tear it the other way around, like you know it from handkerchiefs, and then you can just use it and put them up. And we advised them, you shouldn't put them up where there's a content on, but if content is missing, if it's just like an emotional campaign like vote me, or I understand you, or if there's not an explicit thing that we can stand for, that we can address, just glue over. So we have really nice situations now, like this one. So here that means oben, it's up, rechts, links, so that's left and right, like a political indication. And that's one of these party advertisements. And that was quite nice because they left just the stupid part, so they didn't glue it completely. And there's a lot of police actions going on now, and they don't know, oh, it's strange because they cut it for free from a cultural institution which is paid by the government. So, and there is also websites, that's one we started. So this is the color code for all PDAs and computers for the background. And this would be the color code for print media. And more and more people start to change the background of their websites. Or, like this one, they really put it on the front page, the project. And now there are newspapers using brown instead of black color to print certain parts of the newspaper. And what is nice about that we take over the same kind, it's just a color, there's nothing on, which is like a mirroring of the missing content of the whole campaigns. And there are new initiatives coming up, like this is an initiative of artists. They got to know, well, all the working space in the center of Berlin is getting more and more expensive. So this whole gentrification debate, maybe that has something to do with that all the public real estate properties are sold. And finally, they like reformulate their they want the city not only now to give them atelier space, which is cheap, but they know, stop selling your properties, because otherwise we are sure we won't have space to produce in the inner part of Berlin. Well, maybe we can stop here.